Welcome, everybody, to today's Save the Sound webinar addressing challenges related to plastic pollution in the Long Island Sound watershed and a related policy solution we are working on in Albany. My name is David Ansel. I'm the Vice President for the Center for Water Protection at Save the Sound, and I am the New York State Policy Team Lead at Save the Sound. For those of you who don't know us well, Save the Sound's mission is to protect and restore the Long Island Sound, and we have many tools to do this, including water monitoring, data analysis, ecological restoration projects, land protection, legal action, and of course, policy work in Hartford, Albany, and Washington, D.C. Today, we are discussing an important piece of legislation we have been working to pass in Albany designed to reduce packaging waste, including plastic, in the state of New York. It's called the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act. You will also hear from members of our team about challenges in the marine environment and on Long Island. Before we jump into the issues, please note that we are recording this webinar and we will save a few minutes at the end for Q&A. During the presentation, you can also put questions in the chat for us to address during Q&A. We will also be discussing ways you can help move this policy opportunity forward. First, we need to discuss the problem that we're trying to solve for. The problem is there's too much waste being created as packaging for goods, and has been reported that up to 40% of plastics waste comes from packaging. So you'll see here we have a whole bunch of data points on this topic, and I want to tell you a few others about here in our region. Trash is literally choking our natural resources. Trash on our beaches and in our waterways is ubiquitous, particularly single-use packaging along the coast of the Long Island Sound. There's an average of 87 pounds of trash per mile. The American Littoral Society analyzed data from 37 years of beach cleanups in New York and found that 6 of the top dozen trash items collected were single-use packaging. This packaging and plastic is not only polluting our beaches, which are one of our region's economic engines, it's critically damaging to wildlife and people. Plastic packaging is a threat to Long Island Sound's fisheries and those that depend on them for food and livelihood. So there's just too much waste. And the other problems related to that are that using incinerators and landfills are not the solution. They are overburdened and are polluters in their own right. People who live near landfills and incinerators suffer from a wide range of health problems such as headaches, asthma, and cancer, and on Long Island are putting their drinking water at risk. Shipping to other communities does not solve the overall problem. There is simply too much plastic and other waste being produced. The packaging waste is a public health and safety issue, and microplastics are getting in our bodies. It's bad for the environment, and it's bad for us, and it disproportionately affects people in disadvantaged communities. It's also a very expensive problem for local communities. Construction and maintenance of landfills, trucking, rail, and running recycling programs all cost municipalities in New York outside of New York City approximately $900 million a year. So you will hear more about the problems from our team at Save the Sound in a couple of minutes. But I want to talk to you now about the policy solution that we're working on. The Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act would require producers to reduce packaging in New York State 30% over 12 years. It would also shift the costs of packaging waste and dealing with it to the producers. It sets reuse and recyclability targets for remaining packaging, and very importantly, bans toxic chemicals from packaging. So we think this is an amazing policy opportunity that really hits the nail on the head, because the core concept that we really think is so critical here is that we can't simply continue to try to clean up the mess at the end of the waste stream. We need to be reducing the amount of waste and plastic that's getting delivered to us in New York. It's a growing knowledge that throwaway culture is not working. Other states are passing these laws, and we know that in Germany and Canada, they've been successful in implementing these policies. So since I've been working on this bill, I every day have an image in my mind of walking into supermarkets where when I was a kid, you'd walk in and you get a bag and you'd fill up the bag with produce and vegetables, and then they'd weigh it and you take it home and you chop it up and use it at home. And I feel like every supermarket I go to now when I walk in, there's just walls of plastic which contain previously sliced and diced fruits and vegetables. And the amount of plastic that's being produced seems to just constantly be increasing. So again, just to hit it over the head one more time, this is about reducing waste at the beginning of the cycle. So I just wanted to emphasize how important that was. Next, I want to give you a little history on what's going on with this bill, since part of what we want to talk about today is ways people can help get this bill passed. It was introduced in 2023. In 2024, it passed in the Senate and died in the Assembly. In 2025, same story. And last year, sadly, didn't get to the floor in either of the houses. What's going on here is, in essence, we believe New Yorkers want this policy in effect, and they want the government to help protect them from this public health and safety problem. 73% of New Yorkers polled in a Siena poll said that they support this policy. We know that municipal leaders in New York City and around the state and county leaders all support it. We know that medical advisors support it, and certainly we in the green organizations support it very much. It seems that nobody really wants all this plastic pollution. Nobody asked to have all this plastic pollution, but industry continues to make a lot of money making and distributing plastic. So it's kind of a David and Goliath. We are all going to have to continue to fight very large scale industry. We know that the list of folks who are lobbying against this policy in Albany include Coke, the American Chemistry Council, Starbucks, Apple, Exxon, many, many more. They're all spending millions of dollars on lobbyists in Albany and major advertising campaigns around the state, including the Long Island Sound region. Senator Pete Harckham, who's the sponsor of the bill, has said this is Washington levels of money being spent to defeat this bill in Albany. And Ella and I can really feel it. Ella McGrail, who we meet in a moment, who's our policy coordinator who lives in Albany. We spend many long days and evenings in Albany by the Assembly trying to convince legislators that this is an important policy that's good for their districts. But we can feel the waves of lobbyists flying in and coming in, and from big law firms, etc. And they're literally standing shoulder to shoulder with us. And they're telling them other things which are not true. For example, they're telling them that if they vote for this policy, their constituents are going to lose certain products that they get in their local markets that their children need, etc. They're also telling them that there's going to be an affordability problem, that the costs of the goods that they're accustomed to bringing home to their family are going to become too expensive. Well, Ella and others in Albany have taken a deep dive on that and have basically determined with data from Columbia University, Consumer Reports, who, by the way, supports this bill, and the data from Canada and Germany, that these conversations and assertions by the industry are in fact a red herring. It's simply not true. They're just used to doing what they want to do, and spending money on lobbyists is for them a drop in the ocean, and they'd rather just have business as usual. So today, during Plastic Free July, we are hosting this webinar as the kickoff to ramping up the work necessary to get this bill passed in the Senate and, very importantly, the Assembly in 2027. So thank you for your time. I'm going to hand this off now to Allison Regilla, our New York sound keeper at Save the Sound, who's going to talk more about the harm plastic packaging is causing in the Long Island Sound. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Allison Regilla, and I operate in the New York side of the Sounds. Here at Save the Sound, I advocate for fishable, swimmable, and drinkable waters. And so, serving as the resident ecologist and climate change scientist, I serve as an environmental watchdog, participate in marine restoration work, and advocate for critical environmental policy like PREA. As you just heard, we have a ubiquitous plastic pollution problem, both on land and unfortunately in our aquatic environments. And PREA acts as that solution by reducing the amount of plastic going out the door to us as consumers. So less plastic waste on land means less plastic pollution entering our natural spaces. We have a precedent that existing legislation on single-use plastic reduction, like the plastic bag ban back in 2020, it demonstrates that when you reduce the amount of plastic in our everyday lives, it meaningfully translates to less of these products along our shores. And so as a sound keeper, I see all types of plastics in the sound, along the sound, in our upper tributaries that lead to the sound. And these range from things like pre-production plastic pellets like Nurdles in New Rochelle, to a diversity of single-use plastic products in our recycling barges in the Bronx. And unfortunately, the single-use plastic products that line our shores with every high tide in places like Flushing Bay and Queens. And so I get to witness the scope of the problem, especially in New York City's waters and shorelines. Next slide, please. And this is really indicative in the open waters of the Sound as well. A study that came out in 2024, those data demonstrate that microplastics in particular, so the smaller flecks of plastic that are less obvious to the untrained eye, exist throughout the entirety of the Sounds. And we see higher concentrations of microplastics in areas like the East River, coming out of New York City where it's heavily populated, but where also geography and reduced, essentially a bottleneck in flow, means there's less dilution. We also see that out by the race near Rhode Island. But essentially the main takeaway here from all of these little dots transecting or lining the profile of the Sound from west to east is it's in our open waters, it's in our shorelines, it's in our bays and harbors. And so the impacts on the marine environment are pretty diverse. We see plastic pollution, again, from the small micro scale, like Nurdles, to the macro scale of full intact products. And unfortunately, the life cycle of these plastics is such that as they're exposed to the elements, they become brittle and break down. And I want to emphasize to us all that plastics don't really degrade. They break down into these smaller fragments that persist in the environment. They become less visible to us, but way more accessible to marine life. And so they're often consumed by the lower trophic levels of our food webs, things like zooplankton, copepods, grass shrimp, up to foraging fish, and into the biota or taxa species that we care about as fishermen or consumers of seafood more broadly. Next slide. And nearly all the plastics that have been produced, we see them in landfills. They're in our waterways, they're buried in sediments of the oceans, our bays and harbors and shorelines. And the impacts of plastic pollution range from things like physical entanglement, especially for marine mammals and turtles, to starvation in marine birds and fish, as plastics take up space in their digestive systems. And we also see these particulate or smaller pieces of plastics bioaccumulating up the food chain. So being consumed by smaller animals that are then consumed by larger animals and up the food chain. And unfortunately, part of this system is that there are ecotoxicological effects. So additives in plastics like bisphenol A or BPA, phthalates, those additives leach out into our water and have physiological impacts on those taxa. So things like increasing susceptibility to disease by influencing or suppressing the immune response, metabolic impacts like reduced growth, reproduction, reduced feeding rates in fish. And these plastic fragments also tend to absorb toxic contaminants, things like PCBs or polychlorinated biphenyls and PFAS. And these contaminants are associated with widespread effects, again, on hormones or endocrine disruption, tend to be carcinogenic, and impact animal behavior more broadly. And so again, bioaccumulating up the food chain, we see these ill effects from smaller animals up to the larger ones that people tend to eat. So next slide. And these impacts go beyond just direct effects on marine species. We know through the life cycle of plastics, from the original extraction of fossil fuels to the refining of those fuels, manufacturing of products, transportation of those products, and then the end use, whether or not it's incineration, some recycling, or ultimately disposal in landfills, or the loss to the environment. All of those steps in the life cycle contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. And those additional CO2 emissions into our atmosphere in turn affect our marine environments. Next slide, please. And so what we see in our coastal waterways with this injection of additional CO2 into our atmosphere is about 25 to 30% of those greenhouse gases being absorbed by our oceans, our coastal estuaries, our bays and harbors. And that warming means there's also less oxygen for marine life. And we see shifts in marine communities over time towards less resilient communities and a turnover of species in general. So we see less lobster, winter flounder, and more of things like black sea bass and summer flounder, impacting our fishermen's livelihoods. And again, with this absorption of CO2 into our marine waterways, it also tends to acidify them. And the change in the carbonate chemistry is such that it makes it way more challenging for things that build a shell to grow and resist predators. It's more energetically expensive for them to live, compromising things like reproduction and their immune system, immune response. And so the overall takeaway here is that while we see these direct impacts on metabolism, physiology more broadly, immune response, there are these indirect effects that are compounded through the contribution of plastic pollution to climate change. And so next slide, please. And again, plastic pollution is ubiquitous in our marine environment and unfortunately along our shorelines. And so here at Save the Sounds, we have an effort through cleanups to try to combat some of this with an immense amount of manpower and time. And so since 2008, we've removed over 200,000 pounds of debris from our coastlines, requiring the help of over 36,000 volunteers and over 1,000 cleanups. So just sitting with that statistic, that's an incredible amount of time spent sopping up the outcome of our continued plastic usage. And so while we continue to push for policy solutions, we're going to continue to do this work on the grounds and tackle it from both ends, which means that we're here, especially in the New York office, actively ramping up cleanups. And so I'll part ways with you guys with this message. If anyone is interested in helping to coordinate a cleanup in your area, particularly in the New York side of the Long Island Sound, please put your information in the chat and we'd be thrilled to coordinate with you. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ella.
Thank you, Allison. That was just fantastic because you really outlined how from even before it becomes trash, just from beginning to end, plastic is creating a huge problem for our waterways, and like the climate change aspect is very big. Just it's even in production and when it's breaking down, it's creating these greenhouse gases, and that's really problematic. Hi guys, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited that we have such a big turnout because this bill is like a third of my personality at this point. As David said before, I am our New York policy coordinator. I'm based up in Albany. I spent 6 to 8 months of my year really pounding the pavement to try and get this bill through because we see it as a huge system change that could really, really help us in so many ways, but especially in reducing the amount of plastic that we are seeing on our streets and in our waters. So my section is I'm going to do a little bit of a case study where we look at Long Island in particular. But the reason we wanted to have this webinar is because we wanted to tell you guys about why this bill matters in particular for our communities around the Sound and the Sound watershed. And a lot of the principles that I'm going to be discussing about why PREA matters for Long Island are why it matters for our other watershed communities and about for the state more broadly. So Allison just told us about the fishery issue, which is huge, obviously, for folks on Long Island, where a bunch of the economy and the culture depends on healthy fisheries that are not going to make people sick with these toxins. But there's also some slightly less obvious impacts that I want to talk about a little bit. So the reason Long Island makes such a good case study for why PREA is important is because of how the waste management system works. So you cannot have a normal municipal solid waste landfill on Long Island. That's been illegal since 1983. And that law was passed because Long Island's leaders really wanted to protect the aquifer. And if you live on Long Island, know about Long Island, you know Long Island has a single aquifer, which is the source of all the drinking water. So it is very important to protect this aquifer. So that's why landfilling, typical landfilling is not permitted for municipal solid waste on Long Island. So the solution that was come up with is if you see these four little triangles here, and this figure comes from it's the Stony Brook Waste and Management Institute. So if you look at these four little triangles here, these are all waste trash incinerators. So most, as you can see down here, like 1.4 million tons annually of this trash is going to these incinerators. So that's most of Long Island's trash is being incinerated. But then, so once you've incinerated trash, that's great, but it's not all gone. You've got ash. And where that ash goes, about 3/4 of that ash is going to the Brookhaven landfill. So most of Long Island's trash going to these incinerators, 3/4 of that going to this landfill. Brookhaven landfill is the linchpin. It's the keystone of Long Island's waste management strategy. So how's that going? Not great, as you might have guessed. This is not going particularly well. The Brookhaven landfill has been called a textbook example of environmental injustice by Dr. Robert Bullard. And Dr. Robert Bullard is considered the father of environmental justice as a discipline. He's really studied the way that particularly people of color are targeted for polluting facilities, which we touched on earlier. So Brookhaven is a really egregious example of this, and that's because it is located in the hamlet of North Belport, which is has a high population of Black and brown folks as compared to the surrounding communities, and the town decided to site the landfill there. They were specifically targeted because of that high population of Black and brown folks. But the really amazing thing about North Belport is that they've had super robust grassroots opposition organized, like coming together as a community to organize against this landfill. And they've been doing that since the 1970s. You can see up here the photo of Monique Fitzgerald, one of those amazing, amazing, eloquent advocates who comes up from Brookhaven to lobby for PREA, which is, yeah, the Packaging Reduction Recycling Infrastructure Act. And so that they've been organizing and organizing against this landfill, trying to get it shut down and trying to get us to produce less trash because it's really hurting their community. They have the shortest life expectancy on Long Island, and it's not close. It's by 20 years behind the longest living community on Long Island. And of course, you can't attribute that all to the landfill, but a reasonable person knows that that is contributing to it. And this landfill is also located right next to the Frank P. Long Intermediate School, which is an elementary school where the kids are consistently getting headaches and rashes because of the fumes from the landfill, and where 30 teachers have developed cancer in just a 10-year period between 1998 and 2008. So not normal, right? This community is definitely being hurt by this landfill. They also had a toxic plume. The landfill is now leaking into their groundwater. PFAS and 1,4-dioxane chemicals are getting into the groundwater and drinking water wells of people who live near the landfill. So this has not been a success story, the Brookhaven landfill. This has been Long Island's solution to waste, and it's not going well. And the town says that the landfill will be at capacity in 2028. In all likelihood, that will get expanded just because there are not a lot of other good options. So we're going to talk about that briefly. So I think David touched on this, that trucking and rail and landfilling are kind of our main options that we're looking at on Long Island once Brookhaven closes. And we'll look briefly. These are the three main alternatives to Brookhaven that are being considered. And they all come with their own unique set of challenges. So if we were to instead, when Brookhaven closes and we need somewhere to put all of Long Island's incinerator ash, one option is to truck it to landfills off island. Well, if you've ever driven on Long Island, you can see why that might be a problem. The roads are already extremely oversaturated. Traffic is a huge problem. And this would require 19,000 trucks annually going back and forth across the island. That would just create an unbelievable traffic problem. And just the tolls alone for those trucks would cost $3.8 million a year. And that's a bill footed by Long Island taxpayers. And that's not even thinking about gas, the driver's salaries, the tipping fees to dump the ash in another person's landfill. So that's not great. Another option is rail, put it freighting the ash off of Long Island. And this has similar issues where the infrastructure would cost over $14.8 million. Again, footed by Long Island taxpayers. And also the rail capacity just really is not there. Or we could do a new ash fill because it's been working so well. And if we were to do that, it would have the same environmental justice and contamination concerns that we're seeing manifested at Brookhaven. So these are all really hard solutions. Like none of them are particularly good, and all of them are going to lead to increases in taxes for folks on Long Island. And the reality is also they're probably going to lead to dumping, which is just people just leaving their trash on the side of the road, or even worse, driving to a remote area like the Pine Barrens where they think they won't get caught and just dropping their trash because paying for it to get disposed of properly is just too expensive. And that comes back to being a threat to the aquifer because that trash, breaks down. It leaks the chemicals and the microplastics that we've been talking about. And that's going to contaminate the water. So this is a real problem. So how would PREA factor into this? How could PREA make this better? It should be said, PREA would not solve this problem, would not make it entirely go away. This is going to be a challenging solution no matter what. But when a committee was created by the town of Brookhaven to study how the island could manage waste after Brookhaven's closure, one of their recommendations was supporting a statewide extended producer responsibility law, which is what PREA is. It's making these companies take responsibility for the packaging they create and making them reduce it. So this could really help. This could really make this situation less drastic. Because as David talked about, PREA is going to require these large producers of packaging to cut that packaging by 30%. 30% of it we just no longer have to deal with. But the other thing that PREA does that's really important is it puts requirements on the remaining packaging to make it more recyclable, more reusable, and refillable. There's certain targets that have to be hit over the years, leading up to 75% of packaging being recyclable by 2055. So what that means is that if we pass PREA, a ton, like 75% or more of the waste that we're getting from packaging is going to be removed from the waste stream because it's going to be going to recycling facilities, or it's going to be going away just by never being produced to begin with, or it's going to be made into goods that actually have value that can be reused. And how we'd accomplish this is, companies will be incentivized or required to create more sustainable packaging. Like we've got this picture of the floss up here. Rather than floss being in a plastic container, companies could abide by PREA by switching to cardboard. It's easy. I buy this kind. They're already doing it. It's just a better way to do it. Or having aluminum bottles rather than plastic bottles. The aluminum is extremely, extremely valuable, recyclable. It can be recycled almost indefinitely. And when producers of packaging start paying more into the system, paying back municipalities for processing all this waste that they create, they're going to get to upgrade their recycling systems. And that's what we've seen in places like Canada and Germany. They are now able to invest in state-of-the-art recycling systems that are able to process much more material so that glass and metal and paper and the plastic that we can recycle can be recycled effectively. So these are the kind of solutions that we could see. And this is not just something that's going to help Long Island. So those things we talked about, increasing municipal costs, local governments having a really hard time figuring out how to manage waste, health concerns, water contamination concerns, the fishery contamination. These are things that communities all around the Sound, and our watershed goes from Westchester, the Bronx, Queens, and the North Shore of Long Island. All of these communities have pretty much recognized that we need to take drastic system-changing action to reduce waste, and that we can do that at the state level. We have that privilege in New York where no matter what's going on federally, here at the state level, we can pass really impactful pollution reduction solutions. So a bunch of our municipalities right here in the watershed have passed resolutions in favor of PREA, asking the state government to pass this bill. And that includes Westchester County, Community Board 12 in the Bronx, Community Boards 1, 6, 11, and 14 in Queens, um, and Suffolk County as well. I don't know why that's not on here. And also health organizations like the New York State Nurses Association and the American Academy of Pediatrics. These are doctors and nurses recognizing that all of us are ingesting these microplastics and the chemicals, the thousands and thousands of chemicals, many of which we haven't even studied, that are used to make plastic. We're ingesting them and they've got really serious health implications. So these organizations are getting on as well. And we have folks, most of Westchester's trash is going to the Peekskill incinerator. So folks from Peekskill are coming up, this is their organization here, the Green WASS, are coming up to say don't want to be breathing in all of Westchester's trash anymore. This is something that's really hurting their community. So this is a watershed-wide and a statewide problem. And I do want to pass it very quickly. We're lucky to be joined by the executive director of the NAACP. They are also supporting this bill for the justice implications that we talked about. So, Chris, did you want to quickly say why the NAACP is supporting this bill?
Yeah, and it's an honor to be here with you all, and I appreciate the framing of this issue because it is dire. And for our communities of color across the state, low-income communities who bear the brunt of carrying this burden, either having the waste treatment, if it's the waste transfer facilities or incinerators or landfills in their districts, in their communities, in their backyards, this is an incredibly important issue. It's also important because it's an avenue where we've seen other governments, other states now take on the industry head on and decide that we're demanding better. The NAACP came to this issue really through the provisions in the bill that outlaw certain toxins and chemicals from being included in packaging of products that we're using, every day. The levels of contaminations that we're seeing of forever plastics, forever chemicals in our bodies. And I know folks have seen the film on Netflix, et cetera. It's becoming such an alarming issue. It's become beyond becoming an alarming issue for our communities. And so we come to this issue that from that perspective, but also, and something I think I just want to leave you all with, is just knowing that the fight that we've waged so far on this has been successful only because we've centered those who've been most impacted. And so continuing to platform local organizations like BLARG, led by a member of ours, Monique Fitzgerald, who you all featured earlier. That's the pathway to success in this fight and in fights like it. Without community-centered activism and advocacy, sometimes these talking points fall on deaf ears. But when we see the real impact, we're able to communicate a little bit clearer. And I'm optimistic about what happens next with this bill because the momentum that's been built in conversations like this, and for you all as advocates to continue to share the concern, to share the impact that's been felt. That's the most necessary thing that you all can do. So I just wanted to join to lend support and to make sure it's very clear that we're standing with you all on this issue.
Chris, thank you so much, and thank you for joining. We really appreciate you sharing that. And it's true. We wanted to talk to you all about why this matters for your communities and the communities that you're in, and to highlight the many grassroots advocates who are already fighting for their communities by supporting this bill. So we've done a lot of talking. Let's get into action. So David mentioned at the beginning how this PREA has not had any trouble passing the Senate. It has passed the Senate 2 years in a row, and would have passed the Senate again this year, except they did not see the point in passing it and spending the time it would take to pass it when the Assembly was not going to pass it again. So, and the reason we're having all these problems with the Assembly is because of the massive, massive corporate lobbying that David mentioned before. It is a David and Goliath battle, not just because Save the Sound employs 3 Davids, but because there's 106 registered organizations lobbying against PREA and only 24 lobbying for it, even though we've got this massive groundswell of grassroots support. So what we need to do is we need to make sure our Assembly candidates, they're all up for election this year, are hearing from their constituents about this bill, and that we, as their constituents, care about them passing this bill and really taking action to change our systems to have less of this toxic waste. And so that's why we're focusing on the assembly today. And personalized communications are always the best. So if you're feeling fired up and you just want to send your own totally personalized message to your assembly candidates, go ahead, because those are the best. But we have pre-prepared a message here for you, where there's a little bit of personalization. We ask you to insert your name and the community you're coming from, and to just say a sentence or two about why the plastic issue and the trash issue matter to you. And then we have this pre-prepared message that you can send them. But if you're not sure where, I just saw passed in the Senate. Yes, Holly, it has passed in the Senate, but just the way it works, the Senate has to keep passing it until the Assembly passes it. That's just like the rules of New York State. It's weird. Don't ask me to explain why, because it's all very convoluted sometimes. But if you don't know your assembly district, that's fine. You can go ahead and scan this QR code right here, or David Siegerman is going to go ahead and throw a link in the chat that you can click on. And that page is going to allow you to find your assembly district based on your address. It is going to ask you to enter your address, and it will tell you which assembly district you're in. And then after that, we have compiled a list of candidate emails. So once you know what your district is, you can scan this QR code, or David will also put the link to that document into the chat as well. And you can find your district and find the contact information for the candidates running for assembly in your district. And we found there are emails available for the vast majority of them. That there are a few candidates that did not have a public contact available, but that was the minority, and every district has at least one candidate with a publicly available contact. And also a few of them they ask you to communicate with them over Instagram or Facebook direct message rather than email. So we put those handles there for those. I will also send all of this in the follow-up email to this. So if this is overwhelming right now, don't worry, you can do it later. But we're going to give 5 or 10 minutes right now. Oh, yes, and David Siegerman is also putting that message text that you see here. He's going to put that in the chat, and that's also at the bottom of the candidate contacts form. So that was a lot of information. If you have questions, if you need some tech help, or if you have questions about the bill before you send the message out, please feel free to do that now. We're going to give people 5 or 10 minutes to do this action. And if you do it, please say in the chat that you've done it. You've reached out to your assembly candidates, and we'd love to hear that. But I'll stop talking now. And if you have any questions, feel free to come off mute or put them in the chat.
Thank you, Ella, and thank you, Allison, and thank you, Chris. That was really helpful, and great way to present the information in a way that I think really highlights the problems and the solutions. I see a hand. Ella, do you want to take the questions
Sure, go
first?
ahead,
I think
Jennifer.
Jennifer Voigt. Yeah.
Jennifer, one of our amazing grassroots advocates.
Hi. Yes, I'm looking forward to continuing to advocate for PREA. What are the next steps, since it didn't pass this past session, and one of the sponsor on the assembly side is retiring? Does the bill have to be like rewritten and reintroduced with new sponsors, or?
That's a really good question, Jennifer. And sorry, I just saw another question in the chat. We compiled the candidates in the Long Island Sound watershed. So if your candidate happens to be outside of the watershed, we did not track down their contact information, but you'll be able to find the sitting assembly person's email on their website. And if you Ballotopedia will say who their opponent is, and you should be able to get their contact for that. But to your question, Jennifer, yes, the assembly sponsor has retired. So we're going to have to find a new assembly sponsor. And we're not entirely sure exactly how that's going to, like, what the steps are about how that's going to go just now. But it's definitely, the bill is 100% going to move forward. We're going to get a new assembly sponsor. And just because of how the rules work, we're going to have to restart this session. And it has, so that means the bill is going to have to pass all the committees again. It's going to have to pass the Senate again. And this time it's going to pass the Assembly because we're going to have amazing grassroots support that's going to overwhelm the corporate support.
Yeah, and importantly, other green organizations have already started compiling lists of sponsors and co-sponsors for that bill, people who are interested in being co-sponsors in the Assembly. And in January, in addition to, it's going to be the start of a new 2-year session. It's also going to be a time when the sponsor who retired was also the chair of the Assembly Environmental Conservation Committee. So we're going to need a new chair of that committee who hopefully will also be the sponsor. And we are in discussions. We're not part of influencing that, but we are trying to stay very close to that issue so that we can make sure we know who it's going to be as soon as possible.
Thank you. And part of passing it in the Assembly is proving to the Speaker that you have enough votes to pass it this year, I guess, is that.
Yeah, 100%. Our experience has been that that the speaker does not like to put bills to the floor unless he's highly confident that he has enough votes for it to pass. And so that's kind of what Ella and I and others have been doing at the last couple nights of session, is running around because the numbers have been pretty close. And trying to just make sure those last few votes are there, and we just haven't quite gotten there. So next year is, we think next year's our year.
We'll talk a little bit more about other next steps actions in the next slide.
Anybody else? Okay.
Maybe we give folks just another minute or two to send off their email, and then we can move on here.
Yeah, and this has been recorded, so we're happy to share it around if folks want to have it for as a resource or share it to other people and organizations. We would be delighted for that to happen as well.
Oh, thanks for letting us know about that, Lauren. All right, so it seems like sending the email is going to be a little bit tricky if you're on your phone. So that's totally fine. We're going to send all of this in the follow-up email. So if it's going to be easier for you to do this later, no problem. We're going to make sure that you'll be able to do that. We'll send the text of the message and the links to both the Assembly District Finder and the contact information. And yes, thank you. David Siegerman put, if you're not finding your candidates on the list, we only did the watershed list. So David has the Ballotopedia full list of candidates that he has put in the chat here. Okay, let's move along here. We're pretty much done, but we want to talk a little bit more about those next steps that Jennifer was mentioning. So if you want to stay involved with this movement to pass PREA, go ahead and sign up for our email list. We're going to send that link in our follow-up as well. We're going to be sending out, we're going to be having probably more sessions like this where we talk through the bill, talk about why it's important, and then give you an action to do. But we participate in lobby days, which is when groups from all across the state come to Albany and talk to their representatives about why passing the PREA matters to them. And our amazing partners at the organization Beyond Plastics provide free buses that they make stops in Suffolk County, Nassau County, TikTok Diner in New York City, and at least one stop in Westchester, possibly more. So the whole watershed is serviced by these free buses up to Albany. If you are ever interested in doing that with us, those occur in the winter and the spring, and both us and Beyond Plastics will be advertising those opportunities. Another thing you can do is join Beyond Plastics does these amazing New York is Not Disposable campaign calls, where they update all their amazing grassroots advocates on what's going on with the bill and what actions they can take. The next one's on August 11th. But also we wanted to let you know that there's a lot of other events all across the watershed that you can get involved with to just be part of the clean water community and also not be looking at a screen, which I like opportunities to not be looking at a screen. So some things that you can do, we just wanted to highlight if you want to support clean water and maybe meet some other people in your area. Our friends at Transition Town, Port Washington are doing oyster raising and tending their oyster beds on the 7th and the 21st and September 4th and 18th. We've got rain garden stewardship with the Bronx River Alliance coming up tomorrow. There's cleanups with our friends at Guardians of Flushing Bay. We've got a lot of pollution concerns around Flushing Bay. And so they're having cleanups on the 22nd of August and the 26th of September. And then we're doing a cleanup at Orchard Beach in the Bronx on September 5th. And we're going to send out the links for all of these with all the information and how you can register. That's all going to be in the follow-up message as well. And we've been talking about the concerns of the throwaway culture. Our friends at Bedford 230, Bedford in Westchester, are holding a repair cafe on September 26th. So if you want to learn how to fix your stuff rather than throwing them out and having them sent to landfills and incinerators, that would be a great thing to check out. So thank you so much, guys. Ooh. That's all that we have, but we have time for Q&A, and I'll pass it back to David.
I don't see any more questions, but please feel free to follow up with Ella, myself, Allison, David Siegerman. We're really appreciative of your time and your interest. And thank you so much for your time and your interest, and we'll be in touch.
Well,
Thank you so much.
I do see a question in the chat, David, from Catherine. And I just put my email in the chat. If you ever just have questions about the bill or anything else about New York State policy, that's my job. So I'd be happy to chat with you about that. But Catherine asked a really good question, which is how do you enforce something like telling companies they need to reduce their packaging by 30%? Really, really, really good question, because that sounds big, right? So there's a couple of things. This does not apply to everyone who produces packaging in New York, because it wouldn't make sense to tell, the Etsy shop that they have to stop sending things in cute little like paper bags. That's not what this is about. PREA only targets companies that gross 5 million or more in profits a year, and or produce more than 2 tons of packaging a year. So you have to be a pretty big company for this to apply to you. And second of all, that there would be the establishment, how other countries have enforced this kind of program. If they have established a packaging, the PRO, so the Packaging Reduction Organization, and they're a nonprofit group that their job is to help companies comply and to make sure companies are complying. So they are tracking how much packaging each company is producing. They're keeping track of like the types of packaging, and they're keeping track of how much each company owes the municipalities that are then dealing with the trash. So it would be the job of that PRO organization to do enforcement of the bill. I hope that if that doesn't answer your question, let me know.
So we do have 2 questions that are here in the Q&A tab. So I'm gonna put one here in the chat. This is from an anonymous participant, and if everything would copy the way it's supposed to, it would be working, but it is not. So Ella, if you go down to the More tab on the bottom and click on that, you'll see the Q&A.
Yep, I'm looking at the Q&A. I see Shino has a question.
Yeah, there are 2 questions in there for you as well.
So is the intent to create a PRO in New York State as well? Who funds the PRO? Yes, so the PRO, we would be starting a PRO for New York State that would be in charge of enforcement. And the part of the fees that companies would have to pay as a part of the Extended Producer Responsibility Program is covering the expenses of the PRO. So that would be factored into the fees.
Thanks, Sheena.
Let's see. Catherine was also talking about. She does food rescue at Cisco's and they don't recycle anything. Boy, Catherine, do I feel that. So many places just don't do recycling. But it can be really challenging because a lot of our systems are underfunded. Municipal governments are finding it really challenging to recycle because we have very overwhelmed and underfunded systems. So that's why we need PREA. These companies need to start paying us back for all of the waste disposal that we, the taxpayers, currently take care of for them. What happened to the bottle bill, Catherine? Another great question. Bottle bill is a fantastic bill. It is still very much alive. We support it too. And it's kind of the topic of another webinar, but that is also a very important system change bill that would help reduce our throwaway culture. And the bottle bill, for folks who don't know, we currently have a bottle deposit return program in New York. So if you bring certain kinds of containers, like bottles like soda bottles, Coca-Cola bottles, if you bring them to your local grocery store or redemption center, you can get a nickel back for that. But a nickel is not what it used to be in 1980. So we'd like to update that and have people get a dime for returning bottles and expand the kind of bottles that can be covered in that. So that's also a very important bill. And it's alive, Catherine. It's kicking. It's going to need a new sponsor. But
Yeah,
it's
and
very much
but it has similar issues with opposition from industry, and they talk a lot about fraud and that they believe it's like a hidden tax because certain of the monies could end up in the New York State General Fund. So happy to discuss that offline if you want to know more about it.
Let's see. So we got another question. What is realistically happening with plastics that are placed in the recycling bin? While the PREA measure is asking suppliers to reduce plastic by 30%, 70% will still be produced, consumed, the cost of which will be passed on to consumers. Um, are there other measures bills that will enforce the recycling of plastics? That's a really good question. Okay, so what's currently happening is that only 6%, between 6 and 9% of the plastic you're putting in your recycling bin is actually getting recycled. So that's unbelievably low. And basically what that means is that plastic recycling as it currently stands does not really work. So probably it's not getting recycled is the answer to your question. And PREA, yes, so PREA is only addressing 30% of packaging for reduction. But as I mentioned, but I was talking a lot, so I'm not surprised if this just got lost. PREA also sets for the remaining packaging that is not being reduced, sets standards that companies have to meet over the years where more and more percentage of their packaging has to be recyclable, reusable, or refillable. And that which ends up to 75% by 2055.
Right.
So that
It's a funny bill because it's a lot of letters and words, but it's two parts. It's reduction, and the second part of the bill's name is Recycling Infrastructure Act. So it's trying to address both problems at the same time.
exactly. We've got another question. So, or someone here is saying, teach children early about littering. I watch high school students open their wrappers and toss them on the street. We, the citizens, should be told to respect our environment. Grand Canyon users are required to take everything out, nothing left behind. There is no sanitation service following campers. It can be done. Very true, Alice. That education is critical. That's very important. And us as consumers can control a lot. But part of why we need PREA is it's so difficult to get away from producing trash, whether you want to or not. We all kind of have no choice but to buy plastic. And as we just talked about, even if you're not throwing your plastic on the street, if you're putting it in the proper bin, it's probably not getting recycled. It's probably ending up in places like Brookhaven and Peekskill. So yeah, the education piece, very, very, very important. But also we need policy change so that this solution is not all on the consumers. And climate education is now required, K through 12 in New York State. Thank you, Shino. Are there, so I think, I don't know if I quite fully answered the first question that Amanda put in here. Are there other measures and bills that will enforce the recycling of plastics to keep it out of landfills, ecosystems, consumer products? Hopefully I talked about that.
And I thought I saw a question about whether there was a similar law in Connecticut in the chat. And I just checked with our Connecticut policy team, and the answer is they are trying, but they're not as far along as we are. They seem to be doing things about fixing and trying to improve incinerators, but I think they're further behind in terms of getting a bill through the legislature.
I will say Connecticut did though in the last couple of years pass a very robust bottle bill that moved the deposit up from a nickel to a dime and expanded the kind of containers that were allowed. So that was great. All right. If we don't have any other questions, like I said, feel free to email me any follow-up questions. We're going to send you that action material, information about all those events, and some other follow-up information in the email. And we so appreciate you guys spending your lunch hour with us.
Yes, thank you all very much. And thanks to my colleagues at Save the Sound. Great work. Thank you all.